This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Yo, this is Sharmane from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, a podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Sharmane, aka Mixed Girl Mane. And before we get into this week's episode, I have to admit a fail, something that actually really bothers me. I feel really bad about this. But so for several months, I've been saying that I have a lot of banked interviews and that it'll carry us for several months, that we're good. We got a lot of content to put out there. And this is true. Throughout the month of sort of like mid-October to actually closer into early parts of December, there was a period of time where I was interviewing like 4 or 5 people a week. So I have quite a few interviews banked. But because that wasn't my typical routine, I wasn't doing my normal process. Basically, after I do a Skype interview with my guests, I instantly download it into a file with their name on it. I check it to make sure that it sounds like, or at least that it recorded. And then it's just banked until that person's episode is time to pull up, and then I start editing. But because it had gotten pretty chaotic during this time, for whatever reason, and it was a good problem to have, I was not working hard to find guests. People were finding me and sending me messages like crazy. And so I was trying to capitalize on people's interest right when they express them, and that's how I ended up doing like 4 or 5 interviews a week sometimes. And then I got a little bit overwhelmed because it was a lot. I work a full-time job. I edit and produce 3 different podcasts a week, and then on top of it, trying to squeeze in 4 or 5 interviews every week was a tough time. So I wasn't doing my normal process, and as a result, I didn't verify that every interview I recorded actually successfully recorded or sounded okay, and I didn't know. So I've sat on a couple of these interviews knowing I was going to put them in February, because I do have mine kind of scheduled out a couple months unless something comes up and then I swap it. So here's the thing. What happened? I have 3 interviews that disappeared or is corrupt or bad quality or never recorded. And they've all been contacted. They're aware of it now. And I'm trying to schedule re-recordings of these interviews. But what happened was that I was planning on holding these out until February for Black History Month. Even though primarily a lot of my guests are a mixed Black of some sort, I wanted to make sure that every episode in February was a mixed Black person. And then I was going to do, at the beginning of every episode, I was going to do something in relation to Black History Month that may be connected to the episode in some way, shape, or form. So the people that I had scheduled for today, February 5th, February 12th, and February 19th, all 3 of those interviews either didn't save, didn't record, are corrupted files or something like that, and I can't gain access to them. And they were all recorded in the same week. So I'm thinking that was the same week that we had this software update thing, and that maybe my update was corrupted or something like that, because I did eventually reinstall this update, and I'm pretty certain that because these 3 interviews happened that week, that's when theirs were corrupted. So I'm really bummed, because they were really great interviews, and there was a reason. Each one had a particular thing about them that was why I was saving them for February. Besides the fact that they were mixed Black people, there was maybe themes, quote unquote themes, to each episode that was important. So, with that being said, the people have been notified. I'm trying to reschedule those interviews, but we haven't managed to do it yet. And so because of that, I have to pull for my other banked interviews. And I realized, and this is actually really surprising to me, of my remaining banked interviews, I no longer have any more mixed Black people. I must have kind of heavily loaded the show previous to this week with mixed Black folks. And that's mostly because that's most of the people who contact me. And so if you're not familiar, or if you're not from the United States, you may not even realize this. I didn't realize this until I started doing the show, that primarily when you use the word mixed here in the States, people automatically assume you mean some kind of mixed Black. And so primarily the people who contact me are mixed Black people. And I do have to do a little bit harder work to try to find non-Black mixed folks to come on the show, or at least to let them know that the show exists, or that the show is also for them. Usually when I contact or come in contact with a mixed person who is of non-Black heritage, they always let me know that they're not Black, and they wonder if that means it's okay for them to be on the show. And then I have to explain to them that to me, or at least my purposes, mixed means any combination of intersectional race, ethnicity, culture, makes you mixed. If you come from something that's not monoracial, you're mixed. And so it's usually a little bit extra work to get a non-Black mixed person to come onto the show. That's all I got right now. Of my remaining interviews that are banked, it turns out that almost everybody that I have is of non-Black mix. So, except for a few that are pending, we're waiting for schedule opportunities and things like that. So that means that I'm going to be certainly starting February off with non-Black mixed folks. But I will try to either re-record those interviews with the folks I had initially planned or schedule new ones so that I can use that theme that I was going to do for Black History Month. So yeah, here's the thing. And I hope I don't bum everybody out with this particular intro, especially because I really enjoyed the interview that I'm capping on the end of this. Sorry, Mike, if I sound sad in the beginning. It's really bummed me out that I didn't get to do what I had planned. I'm really disappointed that I didn't know that an error that happened in October I didn't catch until now. I'm really disappointed in myself over that. And as a mixed Japanese, disappointment is the worst kind of punishment that you can experience. It really sucks to be a disappointment. And I feel like I'm disappointing the people who I've interviewed, and I disappoint my guests, or I disappoint my audience and things like that by not being able to do this. So, and then I disappoint myself. And since I suffer from depression, it's easy to slip into these spirals of depression because of that. I've been kind of fighting it off all week because I've been so upset about this, but I'm trying to just focus on the thing and get back into my routine. That's the thing. So because I had gotten overwhelmed back then, I've stopped allowing myself to overload my week with interviews. Pace them out now. I explain to the people who are interested in participating, because usually once somebody sets me up, they're like excited. They want to participate right now. So I'm pacing that out so I don't make that mistake, and making sure that I follow my process. Do the interview, download the interview, check the interview, put it on my hard drive, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, at least it's a lesson learned. I can learn something from it. I'm just really bummed about it, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. Hopefully I can reconnect with these people in a timely fashion so we can get their interviews up. But if it's not timely and they're still willing to come on the show, I'll get their interviews up in the future, and then I'll note who they were and why I'm bummed that I didn't get to do them when I wanted to. Because, I'm hella transparent. I just tell you guys all the fuck ups that I do. But anyways, okay. I'll try to move on from there. So next week, we'll see what happens. As of right now, I know who I'm going to put on if I don't get to record these other interviews. They're also aware of it. I've told them, this is the week you'll be on unless blah, blah, blah happens and stuff like that. So we'll see. So right now, I won't announce what's going on next week, but we will switch over to what's going on this week. So my guest this week, damn, I'm already 8 minutes in. Okay. So my guest this week is actually someone I don't know in meat space, but I do know in cyberspace. I am a frequent guest on this show, Why So Serious, which is a podcast, a geek nerd podcast, which is hosted by Brandon Carr, Devin Carr, his cousin, and our guest today, Mike Hassoun. Mike is a Halfabic. He is half white, half Arabic, and I'm the one who calls him that because when I was introduced to him as White Mike. And in the course of our conversation, because he realized I was mixed, he let me know, well, actually, I'm half Arabic. And I called him Halfabic, and he had never heard this term before. It's what I call my husband. My husband is half German, half Palestinian, and so I call him Halfabic because we always like mashup words. I'm Blackanese, he's Halfabic. So I call Mike this, and he loves it. Now he uses it. And in the course of our sort of building a relationship through guesting on their podcast, I've asked him to come on the show, and he was down for it. It was a fun interview, and it actually was one that I recorded just last week, and so I am kind of moving it ahead of some of the other ones I have banked because it's the one that's giving me feels right now. Because I was so bummed out about what happened, I want to put up something that kind of gives me a little bit of joy, and it was fun to talk to Mike. A couple reasons. One, I'm always making fun of him for being younger than me, as if that's even a thing of important. I'm like twice his age. He's in his early 20s, I'm in my early 40s, and there's things he says when we're on Why So Serious that makes me realize that I'm that much older, and yet we share this, huge thing in common. Our geekdom is very similar, so it's just funny. I enjoy kind of messing with him a little bit on the show, and that's what Why So Serious is. It's pretty much just a bunch of people that just cap on each other all day long, which is why I enjoy it so much. But this was the first time that we talked, just the two of us, and we talked about mixedness, which is my favorite subject to talk about, and it was interesting hearing his perspective. In a lot of cases of the mixed white and Arabic people that I know, he has a very similar situation in which he kind of presents white if you're not paying that close attention. If you are paying a little closer attention, you're like, oh, there's something else going on there, which is exactly the experience I had with my husband when we met as teenagers. And but if he's in the sun, he tans up and you're like, oh, you're definitely not just white. or if he grows a beard or something like that, you're like, oh, there's definitely something else going on like that. And so Mike had this very similar experience of something that I kind of had a background in. And it was fun to meet somebody that, I didn't know, that I haven't known for years, that have had a very similar experience to my husband. So it's interesting. I enjoyed it, and it's fun, and he's sweet. And also, I don't know if we talked about it before the interview or after, but he just recently came back from a trip to the Grand Cayman Islands, a diving trip in which he brought a Aquaman trident with him to the trip, and part of his diving is a whole bunch of pictures of him holding the trident underwater, which I just think is fucking adorable. I really love Mike. I think he's sweet. So I'm going to turn it over to our discussion about being a mixed Italian Lebanese, and it was a lot of fun. Before I do that, though, as you know, Militantly Mixed is a fan-sponsored podcast, and with your donations, it really does help keep us going and growing. We have two options for sponsoring. The first is patreon.com, where you can sponsor on a monthly basis, and there are different rewards depending on which level you sponsor at. With Patreon, that primarily helps keep us on air. It helps pay for the hosting fees, the website, the email accounts, and all that other kind of stuff. So that really does help keep us going. The keep us growing portion that I always say is really the paypal.me/militantly mixed. Those are the one-time only donations, or you're not obligated to keep it up every month. But when we get donations there, those are the ones that help me with immediate needs, like improving the equipment, or maybe placing an ad to try to get a broader footprint. Because the thing is, while we are growing, it would be really nice to have a larger footprint, because every time I meet a new mixed race person who has heard the show, their need for hearing something like this is so heavy that I'm just thinking of all the other people in the world who do feel the same way but don't know that we exist. And that's really primarily why I am so constant on mentioning the sponsorship. I would, of course, do it myself if I made enough money to be able to do it. And I do use my own funds to keep us going. But it really does help when people get involved. And I'm usually really pretty overwhelmed by the donations that we get. I'm shocked that people care enough to support us. And at the same time, I know that it's without that support, I wouldn't be able to move as fast as I have been. And so I'm definitely grateful. I don't mean to sound ungrateful when I said, like, we need more, though. I just mean it in terms of, like, if I could share the initial contacts that I get from people who hear the show for the first time, and I do sometimes I do it anonymously, sometimes they allow me to share, but the amount of emotion that I get from first time contacts with people is such, oh gosh, it's such a big deal for me. I don't know. It's a heavy but good burden to carry, if that's a way to say it. I feel such a responsibility now to other mixed race people to make sure that I continue to produce content that will support them, make them feel represented, reflect their stories back at them, or share their own personal stories if they're willing to do that. And I have several people who I'm in contact with who aren't willing to actually come on the show, but they just stay in contact with me. And this is an amazing aspect of doing the show. And it's a life-giving aspect of doing the show. And I will hold and carry this responsibility for as long as I am capable of doing it. And hopefully be able to pass it on to somebody else if I get incapable of doing it. So yeah, the sponsorship really, really does help keep us growing. And it helps other people. It's a therapeutic thing. I can't say it enough. I know that I talk about my mental health a lot on the show. But it's not a joke. It's a serious thing. When you read the context that I get initially, you know that what they've heard has helped their mental health in some way, shape, or form, because they needed to feel seen or represented. It's always something that they've heard on an episode, which is the first line in the message they send me, almost always. It's actually kind of crazy how similar people's responses are when they've heard an episode that connects it to them. So with that in mind, that's why I keep up every week saying how important it is to sponsor, because it really, really does help. And, eventually, if I'm able to make this my primary function, just being a podcaster full time, that's my outreach, is about helping mixed race people feel normal in their world, because I needed it. And that's why I tried to create it. Yeah, I think that's good. Let's move on to this week's guest. I've talked a little bit about Mike. If you've heard me mention the YSO Series podcast and Mocha Minutes and Single Simulcast, I'm usually on YSO Series with somebody from either of those shows. It's a great group of people. I absolutely love them. Not a one of them have I met in person, but you would think we were really close friends given how we cap on each other, and that is the best form of friendship. If you can't make fun of your friends, you're not friends. So yeah, and yeah. Let's do it. Help me welcome Mike Hassoun. Have it with Mike. All right, so my guest this week is Mike, aka Halfabic. He, which I named him that. He is a co-host on the show YSO Series, which if you've heard some of the movie reviews that I've done for that show, that's how he and I met. And when I first got involved with the show YSO Series, they described Mike as White Mike. And then through conversation, Mike revealed he was half Arabic, and so I started calling him Halfabic Mike, like, because my husband's Halfabic also. So, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about your background?
So, I am Mike. I'm from the YSO Series podcast. And let me just say, by the way, that ever since I never thought of Halfabic as like a term, but I love it. And since we have had that initial conversation, however long ago that was, I like used that all. So I stole that from you. I hope you don't mind.
I'm happy
but I
to
use
give
that
it
now. And I love it. So yeah, I do the YSO Series podcast, and we do like we're like nerd podcasts. So
hardcore,
a lot of
podcasts.
super. Yeah, Brandon describes me. I'm supposed to be the other host. Brandon describes me as like I'm supposed to have all the information because I read all the comic books.
And you're a DC dude, right? Primarily.
I mean, I love them all. But I do read a lot of DC. I mean, Batman's my favorite superhero, so I'll read like a lot of Batman, but I don't dislike. I want both of them to do well. And I can admit when DC makes a terrible movie because they did.
I mean, can you? Because you're pretty all up on that Aquaman.
I liked Aquaman, but I don't know. Yeah,
it's fine.
I can admit when like Suicide Squad was terrible and Justice League was terrible, and I liked certain scenes of Batman v Superman, but it was also, for the most part, it was pretty terrible. I think they were all not as bad as Venom was, though. I will say that.
See, that surprised me that you guys are so hardcore against Venom. It's not that I'm claiming that Venom was a good movie or anything like that, but I didn't hate it the way I hated Justice League or Batman v Superman or Wonder Woman. Like, it was okay. It was fine for what it was. And the same with Aquaman. Like, Aquaman has some moments that I enjoy, but overall, I can't give that movie full-on credit. All I can say is that it's like the best thing that DC has been able to put out in the last 5 years.
No, I agree, but I don't know. I think that's why people are loving it so much. Is just 'cause, not to stray from the topic of the show, but
no, that's fine. We're geeks. That's what we do.
It's refreshing to see a DC movie do better than its predecessors. So
my favorite part about Aquaman was just that they at least gave us an explanation that allowed us to understand him as a mixed race character. You know, at least for the sake of the movie, whatever, not for the sake of the books necessarily. I could have done without all of the half breeds and mongrels. That I was very sensitive as a mixed person when we were sitting in that movie, but yeah, Momo is adorable. So what are you gonna do?
True, and yeah. So I liked it.
But let's talk about it. Let's talk about your background and what was it like for you being little baby Halfabic Mike?
So I'm half Lebanese. We are. I'm sure. It's a very small Middle Eastern country, and growing up, honestly, I'm younger than a lot. Most of you seem to like or
we like to pick on you for being at least about half my age. How old are you?
Yeah, I'm 23. I'll be 24.
So you're not quite half my age, but you're getting there. I was a full grown ass adult by the time you came around.
Yeah, so I was born in '95, and I don't remember very much about I would say like first grade. I think first grade is when I really started to remember things because that was so life for me has been pretty, like, I won't lie, it's been pretty easy. Like, yeah, I have a good family, you know. I mean, my mom is Italian and my dad is full blown Lebanese. He was born there and he came here when he was like 15 to go to college. 16. He went to college early at the age of 16 from the Middle East, and he stayed here ever since. And he was the only one in his family to marry outside of the Lebanese group. They're very, like, I try to avoid some of the stereotypes, but they're very cliquey, group of people.
Yeah.
And so me and my two sisters were born. We're the only ones on that side of the family who are not 100% Lebanese. A lot of my cousins know the language 100%, and I only learned about a half of it because my grandfather was teaching me before he died. And they don't have they love us, no one, our family, they don't shun us or anything, but my mom said that she was kind of pushed aside at the early stages of their relationship. And my grandfather was very much the he liked the firstborn son thing, which I am. I'm the oldest and I'm a boy. So they, and he put a lot of, he wanted me to he wanted me to have a dual citizenship, and he wanted me to, learn the language, and he was trying that. But growing up, until 9/11, everything was pretty much the same. And I remember I was in first grade when 9/11 happened, so not a lot of first graders were understanding what was going on in the world,
right?
But and I don't remember very much about my early childhood, but I do remember a very distinct memory of, I think my whole family was going out to dinner, and my two younger sisters, one of them, the youngest one, is 5 years younger than me, so she would have been really young. And the middle one is 2 years younger than me, and I was in first grade. So I don't remember what led to this conversation, but my dad had turned around and my mom had turned around. We were at a red light on our way to dinner, and they were like, "Hey, don't talk about your Lebanese side. If anyone asks, just be Italian or French or something. Just say," and we were confused.
Damn.
We didn't know why. And I don't think I remember they didn't start teaching about it in schools until I was maybe in third or fourth grade. And I remember they did a whole presentation on 9/11, and people were older then. They're not old, but they're, older than first grade. And they were, I remember leaving kind of depressed. I remember that too. There's a few distinct memories that I can very clearly remember happening. I remember leaving and I was really bummed out the rest of the day. I was like, that's so terrible. Why would this happen? And
were you connecting that you had an ethnic tie to the event in any way, shape, or form? What was it about that you think made you feel bummed out?
It wasn't, it was probably half the ethnic thing, but the other, the schools were kind of teaching that, not so much Al Qaeda or whatever, or the terror, they were kind of, they weren't explicitly saying this, but it kind of felt that they were putting it on the Muslims. And
yeah,
Lebanon for the longest time was the only non-Christian, only non-Muslim Middle Eastern country, which is changing now. So my dad was he doesn't really practice, but his family was Maronite Catholic, and he converted from my mom. So, but that didn't growing when people got older, no one really made that no one made that difference. There was a lot of
because here everybody's dumb and they think that just being Arab means Muslim, and you couldn't possibly be any other religion.
So I didn't go through very much. Not a lot of things bothered me growing up, even when people would make fun of me, because I always had pretty good friends. But I can draw on a few. I remember I had a teacher who would in high school. Actually, I was a freshman in high school at this point, so I'm 14 now, and the teacher would have been way older, and he called me terrorist, and that didn't
no.
I actually, me in high school, I was this, I had a lot of friends in high school, nothing really bothered me. It didn't. I told it to my mom as a joke, and she was really mad, and she's not even and she called the school, and then he was really pissed at me for the rest of the 4 years, and I think he was my homeroom teacher senior year, and it just got really dramatic. My last name is Hassoun, and it is spelled pretty, I think it's pretty easy to pronounce.
Yeah, it looks.
I get Hassan a lot because it's Oun, and I get that, but a lot of kids and teachers will just be like, "Hussein, are you in the room?" And I'm like, "Yes, that's not."
I see.
It's very, very different. There's no U in there anywhere, or an E,
right,
or an I.
Right.
You get a lot of that, and they would, so it wasn't I wasn't picked on or attacked or like severely like, prejudiced against. I'm grateful for that. But I can there are small bits and pieces throughout my like upbringing that I can remember. And nowadays, like a lot of people, I don't get very much hate at all. A lot of people just assume when they meet me that I'm Muslim.
They do?
A lot of people at work. Fun fact, at work, I'm actually heavily the minority. I work in tech and in IT, and there's not a lot of white people in tech. There are a lot of Indians, a lot of Asians, and a lot of Latinos, and I'm friends with a lot of them. And they're good people. Like they asked, they were like, oh, when I met you, I assumed you were like Muslim. I'm like, oh, well, and I explained the difference. I wouldn't say it's a negative thing. But
it's being identified as what you are, though, versus whatever assumptions that they have that come along with their belief of what it is to be Muslim.
Yeah.
You're trying to combat that.
It was, and on the plus side, I mean, not the plus side, but on the other hand, growing up with people who were, when I was in college, there were groups, there were Middle Eastern kids on campus, but they would like section off into their own like groups based on their country. And they didn't care that I was half. They would always try, like there was a group of Saudi Arabian kids who were, they were always very friendly with me, and they were always trying to get me to like be with them and hang out with them.
Oh, really?
And it was nice, and they would invite me to cookouts. But they I had a lot of different friends from a lot of different backgrounds, and I would try and they didn't want to mix. They wanted to just be with their own people, which I get. But also, like, I think part of the reason I look at the rest of my family and I look at me is I like having the difference in culture, because another thing I remember is when I was in 5th grade, we do this thing every year where you pick one side of your nationality or ethnicity, and you do a big presentation on it, and every kid, it's all on the same day, and you wear clothes from that country, and you bring food from that country, and you set it up. And I looked at the list, and so I'm half Italian and half Lebanese, so I have to pick one. So there's 12 kids who are Italian, and then there's a bunch of Polish and a bunch of and I'm like, there's no Lebanese on there. So I was like, you know what, I'll be the Lebanese. That was always interesting to me, because I had something else to bring to the table, because for the longest time the Italian half of me was the majority of the groups that I was in, pretty much up to when I was in college, when I was in high school, and pretty much up until work right now. I've always been in the majority, so it was always nice to have that other half that I can draw on for.
Right.
And we were a big hit on those days. My mom learned how to cook Lebanese food for my dad, because he's not that great at cooking. And she would make a big feast, and we'd bring it in, and people liked it, and it was cool. And it was.
What are some of your favorite Lebanese foods?
My favorite Lebanese food is kibbeh. Have you ever had it before? It's lamb. It's lamb. They make it. There's footballs, and then there's
yes, I love those.
Yeah, those are really good. You dip it in a nice yogurt sauce. You get a little tabbouleh on the side. You put it in some pita bread, grape leaves, baklava is the dessert. I actually go when I meet a new girl, and I'm dating a lot. I usually always go to a Lebanese restaurant first, because you gotta
make sure she can roll with you food wise.
Yeah, and my favorite restaurant is, the chef is actually mixed race, and he is half Spanish and half Lebanese, and he makes dishes that are they're half Lebanese dishes and half Spanish dishes, and that's actually where I go. It's not too expensive. The food is fantastic. It's like it's like appetizer style. You order a bunch, and it always works. Yeah, top. That's exactly what it is. I forgot what it's called. So I always go there actually when I go on first dates with people, and it's a big hit, and the food's fantastic, and you get a little bit of because I like people. I like talking about that culture, because it's different. It's always been different. And I mean, Lebanon is a small Middle Eastern country. When you don't the Lebanese are they're a very cliquey group of people, and so it's hard to meet people who are also Lebanese. So when I meet people, they're always a lot of them have never even heard of Lebanon, which I found kind of hard to believe, to be honest. But
yeah, it is kind of weird when that kind of stuff happens. Yeah, there's a lot of weird things about Americans that the culture has this hate towards the Middle East, and yet most of them couldn't name even 5 countries in the Middle East.
Well, you know what they think? You know how this is ridiculous, 100% ridiculous. When people meet me for the first time and they try to guess my nationality, especially after I've been in the sun for a little bit, the top 2 guesses every single time I get, you want to know what they are? It's Latino and Indian.
That's the same. I swear, it's every episode of this show that has anybody mixed is like, I usually get Latinx, so, some kind of Latin in some way, shape, or form. It's ridiculous.
I could kind of see the Latin. I do not see Indian at all. And like, I don't know where they get
that one's kind of strange because you, like I was telling you earlier, like you look like if you're not trying too hard, if you're just trying to do a snap judgment, you're like, yeah, it's a white guy. But when you actually pay a little closer attention, you're like, but there's something else going on. And like the photo I'm looking at you right now, you are a little bit darker in that photo, but I've seen a variety of photos of you, and sometimes you do look just like a dude, just a dude bro. Yeah, and sometimes you look like you're some kind of mix.
Yeah, it all depends on, like, my hair gets lighter in the winter time, and I like it when it's dark. That's like, I think it's a very unique color. I like having the dark. I got a lot of things from my mom and a lot of things from my dad, and I think it mixed pretty well, and I'm happy to have that. I actually like having like the dark skin tan more. I don't really know why.
Same. I feel like I prefer being darker too.
Yeah, it looks more like exotic, more like.
Oh no! Like, you said the word. Don't say it.
I meant like it looks more like, I like being like the outlier in a group of people.
I got it.
Because you always have something interesting to bring, like conversationally, or like that's why. Like I don't know how I would class myself as being good on a date, but if I bring somebody to like that restaurant, I have a lot I can talk about right off the bat because I know the food and I know the culture, and I like the Lebanese. Actually, they party pretty hard too. They have like these hufflies, and they do the big parties, and they're all night, and they celebrate. And there's a lot of food and drinks. And the only thing I dislike about a lot of that is they're not very like inclusive to other people. Like my mom always feels super awkward at those.
Yeah.
Not much nowadays because she knows everyone in the Lebanese community now, but like, she told me when she was like pregnant with me, she was never invited to anything when they were having events and stuff, and it bothered her. And I mean, like people, I don't know what it was like before 9/11. I don't know if people disliked Arabs like they did after 9/11.
There was a little of that, only because in 1993 there was the first World Trade Center attack, and in terms of like my awareness of stuff like that, there was always like a little bit of an issue. Plus we had the Gulf War and everything like that. So there was some anti-Arab, anti-Muslim sentiment, but it wasn't near to what happened after 9/11. After 9/11, you couldn't be even a little bit brown. It was like a period of time in which Black people were disregarded as a threat because now we had Muslims and Arabs to be afraid of. And you could see it like in the culture. I mean, even like you just said, you had a teacher that basically called you a terrorist, thinking it wasn't acting like it wasn't a big deal, and then being pissed at you for the rest of the year because he got in trouble for it. It was it had gotten so comfortable to be anti-Arab or anti-Muslim during that time that it was just ridiculous. And that's around the same time that we found out that my husband was actually half Arabic, because we didn't from the time I met him when I was 15 in 1993, I had been asking him, what race are you? I know you're something. You can't just be white. And then I meet both of his white parents, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like, he must be adopted, and they never told him, or switched at birth or whatever. And then his mom finally lets us know around senior year that he had a different father. So I'm like, oh, okay, now there's something in that father. But it took another 4 years until she said that he was Arabic. And even then, she had the wrong country. She said he was Kuwaiti. And at that's the time I was friends with my Syrian Lebanese friend, and so once they accepted him right away, even though he was mixed and he didn't grow up around the Arabic culture. They were like, oh, we got to get you some knowledge. So that's when we started participating in all the events and eating all the food. And I have a little bit of a understanding of things of the culture because I was around it for so long, but as an outsider. And even eventually I got adopted by all the aunties. They were always really welcoming of me, but it was because I was never a threat to marry any of their nephews and stuff like that, because I already had my Halfabic at home. I didn't need it. But that was a weird time, because once we realized he was Arabic or mixed with Arabic, even though he wasn't culturally Arabic or anything like that, it made me very aware of him wearing certain things when we traveled, making sure he didn't have a full beard, because all of a sudden he does become very Arab looking when he has a beard, things like that. So I wonder if, since you grow up basically in a world that is entirely post 9/11, even though you're born earlier, but you kind of don't start to form into a person until after it. I wonder how much of your understanding, like you said, there were moments where you were kind of bummed out about things. I wonder how much of your understanding about who you were as a mixed kid, like, did you get that you came from two different cultures? Was that really clear from you the whole time?
Yeah, because I had the contrast of looking at I had my mom's side of the family was, I mean, they were all, my uncle's Jewish, but they're all white. They're not really they all look white. They all are very culturally, like, they don't practice really any religion. They're just not. And then
are they like Northern Italians? Is that why they are whiter looking?
They're like Rome. They're like from a small village outside Rome. Okay. So it's like central. And they were like, my mom's grandma, who was like my great grandma, was alive for a large portion of my current life. And she was like the old school stereotypical like Italian woman that you would,
like black dress widows type.
Yeah, like, tough old Italian woman who's always baking, even though she's like super old and should just be resting. You know what I mean? Like, right. Always trying to feed you, always has cookies at the house and can't, always. Yeah. And she had dementia. So for the better part of my life that she was alive, I couldn't really learn anything from her. My dad's side of the family, in their old age, his parents were all there, and they were very, like, he was old, my grandfather, but he was trying to teach like that, So I always knew, and because my cousins on my dad's side are 100% Lebanese, and they, like, my mom's side of the family lives a certain way, and they're all kind of similar in that regard. And my dad's side of the family lives a certain way, and they're all kind of the same in that regard. But our house was different. Like, my parents wouldn't care who I brought home if I was in a relationship with somebody. If they were, my dad would not care if they're not Lebanese. My mom wouldn't care if they're not Italian. They, my aunts and uncles, they would care, I think. And I'm the oldest of all the cousins but one, so it's really hard to see how that's going to go. I don't have to really worry about who I bring home unless they're like a drug dealer or something, like, unless there's like obvious red flags that most parents would be concerned about. It's not like I have to worry. Like, if I get attracted to somebody of a different race or a culture, I don't have to really worry about, because they did it with each other. I mean,
right.
So I always knew that things were different, but it didn't really start to show until like, people would say things like, my dad told me to shave before we would go to the like travel. He always did. My dad's name, my first name is Michael, and they did that on purpose. When I was born, which was even before 9/11, so that I don't know what that says, but
yeah, like I said, there was still some anti-Arab, anti-Muslim sentiment. It just wasn't to the degree.
Yeah. So my mom picked a name and she went with Michael. My sisters are Natalie and Alexandra. We have like white people names, but my dad's name is Tufik. And I remember, like, I've had several conversations with him, and he's like, I hate my name. I'm not going to change it, but I hate it and I think
really?
He probably went through more hardships than I ever did. I mean,
right.
I had a few people who would make snide. I remember there were people on the team that I was on in high school. They would say, "You're Lebanese. What is that? Like, what do you do there?" Or that same teacher or other people would be like, "You can't fly a plane. You could never fly a plane." For the record, I'm a drone pilot, so I mean.
No. You're like, it's like, so your dad came here when he was pretty young to start for college or whatever. Where did he end up? Like, what part of the United States did he move? So
my dad's like history is it's actually a pretty interesting story. It's kind of a sad one though too. My dad, so I was a hyper child. I wasn't out of the ordinary. A lot of children were like me, but over there, it's the way of life as I understand it. The way it was told to me was different, and my mom made it sound like they kind of just didn't want to deal with it. So when my dad was 10, they shipped him off, and he lived in a monastery for a few years to like behave, like, to calm down and behave. But the way that my mom understands it from my aunts after they told the story, he was not like a problem child. He didn't do bad things. He was just running around like a normal like child. After that, after a few years in the monastery, I think he spent like 6 years there. They would visit on holidays.
Oh my gosh.
He came here all by himself, and he ended up in Pittsburgh because he went to Carnegie Mellon and then to Pitt. So he came here for college, and he came here younger. He was 16, and he was bad at his English. He was all by himself. And he stayed for the opportunities that were available here that were not available back home. I mean, back home, he told me like stories of how there was always like fighting, outbreaking. He said like, you know, different groups of people from different countries would come and they would over different reasons. Like he told me one time on one particular occasion, there were Syrian soldiers who had like, you know, come into town and they were posting guards and they were shooting at some of the Lebanese citizens for something that I don't remember what the reason was, but he had to like, his mom had sent him to go buy food from the grocery store and he had to like go through some back alleys to avoid that. And so there were opportunities available here that were not there, and he stayed here after school. And eventually, one by one, everyone on his side of like his parents and sisters all ended up here, and they're still in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh actually has a pretty big Lebanese community, fun fact. So that's how he like got here, and he stayed here for the most part. I think at this point he has spent most of his life in the United States, not where he was born.
And he didn't pick like an American sounding name as a backup or whatever for his...
He never changed it. He doesn't go by Tufik. He goes by Toof.
Okay. Yeah.
But he never changed it, but he never liked it. And I had heard him like growing up several times refer to certain people he didn't know. Like when we were traveling, whatever, he would say, "I'm French. Like I'm French," you know.
That was his.
He would say, cover. Yeah. I mean, so he would say he never changed his name, but he would, and he, you know, we had normal, like not normal, but I don't want to say they're normal because I think every name is normal. But contrary to what people were used to, you had
Western sounding names.
Yeah, we had Western sounding names. The only problems I've ever had were because of my last name.
Right.
And it didn't like, I don't think it got to me like I feel like it should have. Or I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to say that, because I, as a person who is like extremely constantly every day aware of my mixedness, and because I had to bounce between 3 different cultures in my own family, when I hear that someone doesn't have a very that isn't as mixed behaving as I am, you know, basically I'm making my whole life out of being mixed with my shows and everything. When I talk to you or people that have a similar upbringing, I'm always surprised. Like, I don't know how to understand your life as well as I do someone who maybe had more experiences like me, because I'm like, how are you mixed but you get to like function as not an exotic or an other? You know, for the most part it seems like you got to be very I don't know, privileged, except for when someone realized that you had a Middle Eastern sounding name.
Yeah, and it's weird because I wouldn't say that it was watered down at all. I don't think they kept anything from us. I don't think that, you know, like the Lebanese culture was there. Mm-hmm. Like our family was there. People were teaching us things. And my sisters and I have always wanted to go there, but my dad is actually terrified to go back.
Oh, really? So he hasn't been back since he came?
No, he went back one time. I was in 6th grade, and it was in 2006 when the Israeli soldiers were kidnapped by the Lebanese government. He went there for his best friend's wedding. He was there for 3 hours, and then bombs started dropping, and he spent every second trying to get back after about 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
So he has been like, they are very against, like they basically were like, unless the Department of State says it's a level 1, which is not going to happen, then we're not allowed to go. However, I actually have plans to go in 2020, not to Lebanon, to Egypt, tentative plans, because at this point I can kind of do, you know, the decision isn't really theirs. Not that I don't respect their opinion, but I think they're afraid, and I think I've always wanted to go there and experience the Middle Eastern culture for what it actually is.
Right.
And I'm now in a position to do so.
You said you speak a little bit. Do you feel conversational enough to be able to travel the Middle East without your father present?
So I can understand what he's saying. But I like speaking back is rugged and grammatically terrible.
Yeah.
The trip is October of 2020, and once I'm going with. So I have reached this point where like I don't have a serious relationship as much as I want one. I am fortunate enough to have like things financially okay, and I want to travel before. A lot of people that I know have been saying that I should travel while I'm in this position, and then of course after, you know, like when the time comes that I find somebody, you know, that'll happen too. But I want to experience a lot that I didn't get to growing up, like with so that, like when I went on the trip last week, it was with a group of people at that dive shop. And I've decided I'm going to go with them to different places around the world, like cool. not like as often as I can afford. So they told me when I was over there that they're planning to do an Egypt 2020 trip. It's not Lebanon, but as a lone traveler who doesn't like the Egyptian language and the Lebanese language are very different.
Yeah, the dialects are hardcore different.
Yeah, so I wouldn't know it even if I was 100% with my Lebanese, and no one on my family is going to go. I cannot get them to go to Lebanon, so this is as close as I can get. It's an incredibly different culture, but I think as a young traveler, it's a good first step. But he's afraid to go back since he has a family and kids now, because if something happens, I think the thought of something happening to him now that,
right,
he has people that are dependent on him. Well, I mean, I'm not dependent on him anymore, but I still have my mom and my 2 younger sisters. That terrifies him, and it's stopped him. And I don't know if he has any regrets. He really doesn't talk about it, and I don't think he likes to. I have an uncle, though, who's 21 years younger than him. He's actually closer to age to me than he is to my dad, who did tell me very recently that if I wanted to go, he would go with me. And I trust him. My parents were very against that, but it's not, it's not that they have any prejudice against the culture. They're just worried about those random acts that you can't control. And I get it. But at the same time, I had people, who are 100% white, who have no, at least I could blend in Lebanon and look, if I had to. They were studying abroad over there, and they people do it. So I want to do it too.
Yeah, but any of us that kind of come from immigrant families, we're sort of raised with whatever the fears and baggage of our family members. So my grandmother, even though I'm second generation American in terms of my grandmothers, both of my grandmothers are immigrants. My Japanese grandmother grew up during World War II, so she has that idea of scarcity and growing up in an occupied country and things like that. So there was always a kind of a fear. There was no speaking Japanese in front of people that we weren't related to, because the military might deport her, even though she was an American citizen and it had been here longer than she'd been in Japan. The military kind of put this fear of deportation in her from the early stages of her marriage. And so even by the time I come around, 20, 30 years later, she still has that fear. And I can't get her to teach me Japanese and stuff like that. Food, if it was about to spoil, she would still eat it, because wartime, you got to eat what's available, is here, you got to eat it. So you can tell the way she raised my mother and by extension me, because my mother wasn't really a parent for most of my life. I know that I've adopted some of her baggage or have some of the fears that she had, only because that's what she raised me with. And I imagine to a degree, you are an American kid, you've never lived in an occupied country, so you don't necessarily have the same kind of fears, or that what seems maybe unfounded fears for you are extremely real and scary for them, for your dad in particular, probably. I wouldn't discourage you from trying to explore that side. You would just have to be aware that shit could go down at any time, because even just knowing that you're American in some cases could be enough to cause.
Yeah, and problems. His fears are not he never told me, but other people in the family told me that he was the oldest, so he was, and while his mom was taking care of the kids, his other siblings, and his dad was at work, if someone needed to go out and get something, it was him, and he had seen. Right. And I had been told, and this is kind of graphic, so I don't know how that works on your show, but my other relatives had said he had seen houses getting blown up, he had seen women getting raped in the street, and those are things that I could never fathom seeing just in the street here. And I know that now, that was so long ago for him, but those seeing things like that semi-frequently, it's I could see why he doesn't want us to go,
right.
But so I'm doing baby steps. I think I'd like to try, Egypt, and then go with my uncle, after that. Maybe they'll calm down after I go to Egypt and come back. I know that the people at the shop were saying that American group trips, they have to have Egyptian armed security there.
Yeah, they do.
So maybe that'll make him feel better. But
because throughout even my life, I've always wanted to go to Egypt because I wanted to study Egyptology and all that kind of stuff. But when I was in high school and leading into college, there were a lot of attacks on American tour groups where buses were bombed and tour groups at the Sphinx or the pyramids were attacked or and things like that. And so there, like, I come from a culture that they were always drilling in fear of the Middle East, fear of the Middle East, fear of the Middle East. But I think it's like anywhere in the world, everybody has their violence and their types of trauma.
Well, yeah, and it's like, not to cut you off, but like nowadays in America, there's a chance you get caught in a mass shooting.
Right,
like,
yeah.
Just like there's a chance that you get bombed on a bus in the middle, like, you know, and I'm in computers now, but I studied architecture for 2 years in school, and I studied a lot of Egyptian architecture, and they're not even going to like they're not going to Cairo or Alexandria, they're going to Siwa, which is, most people have not heard of it. I have heard of it, and I am fascinated with that city, and I've always wanted to go there, and I never thought I would be able to. When they said that, as soon as they said Siwa, I was like, it's not available to put your like name in for, like, to reserve it, you usually have to give them a small, like, down, like, they're expensive trips, but so far away, and you don't have to pay it all at once, you pay it over time. You just have to give them a couple $100s to reserve your name, like, to hold your spot, and then you could pay as you want over time. I'm like, you're going to Siwa, as soon as that becomes available for a booking, I want it, and I want to go, and I want to, like, it was fascinating to me because I did a lot of studying on this. So, but like the end game, I would love to go and see Lebanon, because my relatives have gone with their kids who are younger than, like, my aunt and uncle went with their 6 and like 5-year-old, you know, and they came back all right. Like, it can
go back to where your people come from. It just makes sense that you would have that desire.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and I want to see, and I want to eat the food. I mean, my aunts and uncles, they can make the food up pretty authentically, but I want to eat it there. I want to see, like, you know, I've heard that they have beautiful mountains and nice beaches, and I'm not, you know, like, and the town. I just want to see it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a way of life that I want to experience that I will not ever be able to unless I'm there.
Right.
And nowadays I'm more aware of especially after talking to you a bunch of times on our podcast, of the, like, I'm more, I mean, I was always proud of it, but I'm more like in tune with it, I guess I would say. It's like, I mean, in recent years, I haven't really faced any sort of, and I never, like, I told you before, like, I didn't get a lot of, like, there's a few things here and there. The last time I think anything really happened was when there was that, like, the Muslim ban scare thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people at college were like, is your dad going to get deported? Are you going to leave? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to.
Well, been a citizen by this time.
Yeah. My dad has been a citizen for a long time. And the other time, actually, which was shocking, so I'm a drone pilot, and I was doing a job for somebody in the Shenandoah area, and I had to be there for sunrise, and it's like 2 hours away. So I woke up at like 4, and I drove over, and it's like the middle of Virginia. And he was like, the guy I was doing it for, he was a coworker, a nice guy, but he was like, all right, let's meet at this McDonald's, discuss the plan, grab some breakfast, I'll buy it, and then we'll go. And I get there first, and I walk in, and they're all the same type. They're all like large, old, overweight white men. And I walk in, and I didn't like, they're all staring at me for like a long time, and they won't take their eyes off me. And I didn't understand really why at first. And the other guy got there, and his wife is a Pakistani woman that I mentioned at he's white and she's Pakistani, and he was like, it's because you have like darker hair, a little bit darker skin, and that you're like not from around here. They can tell. So they're like, and I'm like, that's so bizarre. Like, and because
you don't walk around with a whole lot of awareness of whether or not people other you.
No, because I never like, either I just never noticed it, or I really like never had to. And you know, it was like, I guess I think a lot of those, I think looking back on it now, a lot of those like jokes that people were making in school about like the last name, I think I had just gotten so used to it. Because when you're young, and I was very impressionable, when your teacher is saying it, it feels normal. Like when I told it didn't feel, I don't, like, I didn't understand necessarily so much. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like hard to explain.
Like when authority figures are saying it, then it feels like it's an okay thing. And so even if you do feel uncomfortable, you'd probably internalize that and be like, what's wrong with me that I feel uncomfortable? The teacher just said this, it has to be okay.
Yeah, and I'm also in high school. It was an all guys school, so there's a lot of pressure to like not be up, you know,
Right.
You get a lot of that, and in all guys school, you get a lot of that like toxic masculinity where you feel like you have to step up. You can't be, so you just brush it off and you keep going. And looking back now, I can see the problems and all that, but back then, it was not like a problem, or I didn't realize what was like. I didn't realize that.
So you don't feel like you were traumatized at all by some of the treatment that you received growing up?
No, I would never claim that, because I've had a good time, I've been fortunate enough, I'll be the first to say it. I've been fortunate enough to be blessed with good experiences for the most part. There are people out there of various cultures and ethnicities who are getting it a lot worse than I did. Even some like the Lebanese people, the various races, I've been I'm good, and there have been a few problems, but I know there are a lot of people out there who've had it 100 times worse. So the way I've always looked at it was like, I want to learn as much about it as I can and be involved in this community as much as I can, but I don't really claim, I don't claim the, I'm not going to claim like prejudice or anything ever, because it's really never happened, and it almost feels like it's not my place. Like there are people who are like having serious prejudice issues. And
there's something in one of the various times that I've been on your show with you and Brandon that I could really tell. It's why I'm so curious about you and why I wanted you to come on the show, is because there's moments of what seems like lack of awareness of people of color, things that you do, that it's comical because it's so innocent. And I'll explain what it is. So what was it that you got a flamethrower, right? So we're on the show, we're on Why So Serious, and Brandon makes you tell everybody how you got your new toy, and it was a flamethrower, and you were like, I'll bring it over to your house and you can play with it. And me and Devin and Brandon, and I don't remember if Stephanie had to have been on that time, all of us go, whoa, like and then Brandon's like, don't come to my house with it. I'll come to your house and I will not touch it the whole time. And you were just like, no, it's fine. And it takes a minute before you realize, hey, all the black people are telling you that probably a big black dude holding a flamethrower is not a good idea. And you're just like, it's one of those moments.
That's what I'm saying. I can't claim certain things because I don't know. I had a pretty, I wouldn't say sheltered, but kind of sheltered. I don't get it, but they know I don't get. I don't mean any harm.
And you're good natured in that you take it when we kind of make fun of you for it.
That's fine though too. It's part of the charm of my role on the show though too. The oblivious white guy is a card I can play very well. It's a role. I mean, not a card, but until I met them, it was always something I was proud of, but it was never something that I never would have claimed a mixed race role. I would never have claimed that for myself until I met all of you, and I feel good about it. But I don't have the same hardships that other people have had, and that's good for me. But the way I look at it now, it's all right, the goal here is to diffuse those show people that there are good people and there are bad people everywhere. My dad grew up in an area where there was a lot of religious conflict, but he doesn't hate Muslims now or whatever, and I have friends that are Muslim. He doesn't care. If I wanted to be in a relationship with one, they wouldn't care, right? But
so you said your father converted for your mother, though, but then you also said your mother's not very religious. So did he convert away from Catholicism?
No, my mom is very religious.
Oh, she is.
But at the same time, so my mom is really Catholic. She goes to church every weekend, but there are two types of Catholics. There are a lot. There are more. My mom was always all right, I'm Catholic, but if you're gonna have sex, you use a condom. You be smart about your, you know what I mean?
Okay, so she's at least a little bit progressive.
She's a progressive Catholic, and she's not preachy either. So there were a lot of so Brandon, I met Brandon at Catholic University of America, and I largely have a negative opinion of the overall experience. I went there because they have a really good, well-known architecture program. I ended up switching to computer science. Brandon and I worked a lot of events together where you have these people who are, I remember very, very clearly, and he was with me. You could ask him about this. We're sitting there and they have the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and this woman raises her hand and she's like, my friend is being assaulted by, they were doing a Q&A, and they were like, my friend is in a domestic violence relationship. You know, he is hitting her and she wants a divorce, but she's really Catholic. What should she do? And the guy was like, no, if there was once love in this marriage, and love can be found again. And Brandon and I are sitting in the back like, wow. But my mom is, you know, if someone's hitting my sister, she's not going to be that type, you know what I mean? Or anyone. So, right. But when my dad converted, he converted from Maronite Catholic to Roman Catholic. So, it's not a
still had to go through a conversion process, even though the basic tenets are similar?
It's not a hard conversion process. I think he had to like study up on his, like the Roman Catholic, you know, version. I don't want to say version, but you know what I mean? Like, and I don't know what the official, like,
sect.
What you do is, but he doesn't go to Mass. He goes on Christmas and Easter, and that's like I don't think religion is a very big part, was a very big part ever of him. And I don't know if that's because of some of the things he saw. Or one time I often wonder if he actually like even believes. And I asked him once and he said, yeah, of course I do. But I don't know if that's just what he would, you know, what my mom would want him to say, or if like, so I don't, but he's not, like, my mom is very active in the church. My dad is watching football on Sundays. You know what I mean? Like
got it.
But like, I don't even remember where I was going with what I said before.
You were talking about the Catholic University and you don't have a very favorable opinion. I asked you about your father converting and stuff like that.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I don't want to get in. I mean, Brandon and I could go on and on and on about a lot of similar that. I don't want to. I mean, I got my diploma from them, so I think I can say whatever I want at this point. But there are a lot of things wrong there. But so he converted, but they're not like old school cat. Like my mom is a Catholic, and she believes, and that's where she, like, you know, that's her belief system, but she doesn't, like, progressive Catholic is a good word. And my dad is the same for the most part. Like, he doesn't really like, he's not super practicing, but he's like, they kind of handle the situations as a team, and they handle them reasonably, I think, with things that have happened with me in the past and with my sisters. We've never had, like I said, we've never had any serious problems. We've been fortunate in that regard, but, you know, I don't have to worry about, like, for example, there's a lot of old-fashioned Catholics who, if you don't bring home another Catholic or someone who's not willing to convert, then that's a problem. That's not so much a problem for me. Like, I don't really have to worry about that, and I'm happy about that.
One question I do want to ask you on this subject, just because it is a little bit different than my experience having a best friend that was Syrian and Lebanese. For her, from the time we were 21 or whatever, her family was trying to get her a husband, and whether that meant good boys from good families that they knew locally, or if someone had to come from back home to meet her and things like that. So throughout the years, I would kind of like spy on her dates. I'd like go to the restaurants that she was being taken to and stuff like that, and checking out the dudes or whatever. I was like always doing that, and occasionally I would go to one of them. Like there was some where it was just like you have to have someone with you, and so I'd be there or whatever. And I always noticed that, like, with the boys, they would tell them to settle down, but they weren't as hardcore about pressuring them to settle down the way they were with the girls. And so as we got older and we got into our 30s, it was starting to be like, okay, you gotta get serious and settle down. What's happening here, right? Do you, being mixed and having your aunts and things like that still here in the States, do you ever feel that sense of pressure of, like, even though you don't have to marry, you know, a Lebanese girl or whatever, do you get pressure from that side of the family to either go back home and find a nice girl or meet somebody nice that they know the family of?
I don't get pressure from my parents, but my aunts and uncles, when I've brought girls home, like I was dating this 100%, she was Irish, and I brought her home, and there was a family like thing, and they were like, why is she white? Like, why isn't she like Lebanese, or what are you doing? And well, you know, like I said, my parents don't care, but I'm single now, and I'll go visit them, and they're like, well, we got it. You come with us. We'll set you, you know, there are a lot of Lebanese people in my family, like, who they went back to Lebanon for like a month with the intention of finding a wife, and they found one, and they bring her back. Yep. And that happens. Like,
that's
it sounds
exactly
weird.
What's happened to some of my friends.
But it happened. My parents would kill me if I did that.
No, they would. So they've really broken the mold. Like, your dad has really kind of broken away from the marriage constraints.
Well, honestly, I don't think they would trust that. Like, you know, they're very like, right. like they're very protective of myself and my sisters, and I think they, but like I have a cousin. My cousin is 27. I'm the second oldest cousin, and so my uncle and my aunt, my dad's sister, had her first, and she had a rougher childhood because my uncle wanted a firstborn son, and my parents, my dad does not get along with all of his siblings right now, and the ones he is talking to, we're talking he's got two sisters and a brother. The brother's they've always had a pretty good relationship, but the sisters, like the one he's talking to right now, he didn't talk to her for 8 years because there was a lot of animosity between my dad's sister's husband and my dad because my uncle really wanted a firstborn son. My mom told me all this growing up. Like he would be really mean to me when I was younger because my mom was like, he was so consumed with jealousy because of this, like being in the Lebanese culture where you need to have a firstborn son. So I'm born, like he has a girl as his first child, and he's the first one to have a child in the family, but she's a girl. And then shortly after, a couple years, I pop out, and all the Lebanese freak out because someone has a firstborn kid. So my grandparents, I was, all the attention was on me for a long time, and that really that pissed them off. And so we're all we're good with them now, and we have a relationship. But there was. She is 27 now, and they're really pushing her to get married, and she wants it too, but she's just not, I think she's conflicted now with all right, well, I have to do this quickly, and she's not she's kind of just trying to make something happen, and it's just kind of too fast, and it's just not working out right now. Me, they don't want me to get married until late 20s, early 30s. And I mean, I get it. My dad didn't get married until he was 33, and my mom was 20. I think he was 31. They're 8 years apart, so and he's older. So my mom was in her early 20s, but my dad was in his late 30s, and they don't have to follow the same path as them, but they're not. They want me my mom's always asking if I have a girlfriend, but she's in no rush to see me get married anytime soon, for a couple of years at least.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, we are coming to the end of our discussion, so I want to ask you, the only question that I have pre-planned for every episode is, what do you, even though you're kind of being forced into thinking of your mixedness through me constantly asking questions, what do you love about being mixed?
I like the open mind that I've developed or have been, I guess, bestowed upon by my parents, that my relatives or friends and who are 100% always get to have. I mean, it's the obvious answer would be the food and stuff, but the more intimate answer I would say would be me and my siblings have get to have a more open outlook on different things of life that my cousins and my aunts and uncles don't share. And I think it's because of the influence from two different worlds when they collide. So, I mean, it's kind of a cheesy answer, I guess, but that's always what I come back to when I compare myself, right, to a lot, because we're the outliers in the family. We're the only ones who are not 100%. Yeah. So I can look at my situation and my experiences and compare it to all my cousins on both sides, and I've had, it's just more, I have more to offer, more to draw from experience-wise, than they would, and I like that.
Before we wrap all the way up, though, why don't you tell everybody about the show and how to find you, if you want to drop your social media handles, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm a co-host on Why So Serious with Brandon and Devin, and heavily joined by Sharmane as well. It's been fantastic. We've been doing it for a year, and we're on all everywhere you can get your podcast. I'm not used to. Brandon's usually the one that does this, so I've been caught off guard here. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google Music. I think that's where you can find it. We talk all about superheroes and stuff, though. So if that's what you're into, I'm sure we'll be we'll be your one-stop shop for all your nerdness. Yeah,
you guys don't just get into comics, you get into wrestling and stuff like that. My comic book show is blackness and comics, but yours is comics and wrestling and TV shows, a whole general nerdery. And
it gets into social issues too. Everyone we draw on that when it's relevant. But so that's what we do. And wow, Brandon would be so upset with me if he heard me just advertise our show right now. I did such a bad job of that. I've heard him say it exactly the same for over a year now, and I should be able to totally repeat it. But wow, my bad. But yeah, that's what we
all
do.
have different strengths.
Mine is not speaking. That's it. That's us. So.
Okay. Well, thank you again for joining me. I do appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Johnson. Music is by David Bogan, The One. And if you like what you heard on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes and wherever you find your podcasts. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.